Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just 1 second as people are entering. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Church, and I'm the Associate Vice President of the Center for Policy and Practice at ACCT. Thank you for joining us for this discussion today to talk about some research around the labor market outcomes for short-term workforce training programs in community colleges. We are excited to share this with you as it's very relevant to the recently enacted Workforce Pell. This webinar is part of a series on various aspects of non-credit programs and data, with our next webinar coming in mid-February, so stay on the lookout for that announcement. Before we get started, I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this session, and the recording will be sent to registrants as well as posted on our website. If you have a question, I will be monitoring the chat function, so if you'd like to ask it, please use that. Non-credit education and non-degree credentials have been around for a while and are growing in popularity, but data collection and analysis have not kept pace. Two leaders in the field who are trying to solve this problem are Dr. Michelle Van Noy and Dr. Peter Bahr. Michelle Van Noy is the director of the Education and Employment Research Center and has more than 20 years of experience conducting research on education and the workforce focused on credentials, community colleges, and connections between higher education and the labor market. Before joining EERC, Dr. Van Noy conducted research at the Community College Research Center at Teachers College, Columbia University, and Mathematica Policy Research. Peter Bahr recently joined Strada Education Foundation to serve as Vice President and Managing Research Director of the Institute for the Future of Work, a think tank embedded within the foundation conducting rigorous academic quality research that provides clear and direct answers to state higher education and workforce policy questions. He is a nationally recognized scholar and expert on post-secondary education, student outcomes, and economic mobility. His research focuses on the role of public post-secondary institutions, especially community and technical colleges, in creating and advancing educational and economic opportunities for socioeconomically disadvantaged students, adult-age students beginning in or returning to college, individuals returning to the community after incarceration, and other disadvantaged groups. He previously served as a tenured professor at the University of Michigan. Michelle and Peter, together with Mark D'Amico and Dr. Di Zhu, established the Non-Credit Research Collaborative to develop, execute, and disseminate research on non-credit education. A central objective of their work in the collaborative is to foster the development of a more robust data infrastructure using three key strategies: generating research to advance the field, creating a taxonomy to guide data collection efforts, and creating learning opportunities to share successful practices. I'm very excited to be joined by these two key leaders who are going to share some information about the Non-Credit Research Collaborative and some of the work in which they have been engaged. So thank you both for being here. I think it's a great place to start would be for Michelle to give kind of an overview of the collaborative and some brief information on some of the projects. And then Peter, will turn it over to you to hear about your recently published research. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I should have put your pictures up so we knew who you were talking about. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then Michelle will bring up your slides.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you for the chance for us to be part of your webinar series at ACCT. We really appreciate this. And I just wanted to spend like a couple minutes just talking a little bit about some of the work with the Non-Credit Research Collaborative. Peter is the star of the show today, but so I don't want to take up much time. But the Non-Credit Research Collaborative, as Steve mentioned, is a collaborative effort between myself, Peter Bahr, Di Zhu, and Mark D'Amico. And we have a website I just want to highlight for you called noncreditresearch.org, where we've compiled our body of work together from all of us. We've been doing research on non-credit, non-degree credentials for many, many years. And we have this website, which we hope will be a resource to the field, and we encourage you to take a look at that. So just wanted to point that out and, quickly just give a little bit of background, a 2-second overview of EERC, which is my home organization. We are a research center based at Rutgers, and we study all things education and work related, including non-credit, non-degree credentials, educational pathways, labor markets, community colleges are a major focus, and the technical workforce. So, for folks who aren't, part of our mailing list, we encourage you to join and be part of that. And also to note one of our projects that Steve alluded to, which is part of what brought Peter, Dee, and Mark and I working closely together, is this effort that we've all been very committed to, which is trying to build the state non-credit data infrastructure. And so the four of us, for years have been working closely with states to understand the nature of the data that they collect on non-credit. We started off together working on this project, doing an inventory of non-credit data, which eventually culminated into a non-credit data taxonomy that we hope will help guide other, states and other institutions in developing their non-credit data infrastructure. And, the project continues on generating research, but also trying to bring people together in our learning community and the specialized working groups for people from states where they can share practices and learn from each other in terms of building up the data infrastructure. And I think, what Peter's going to share today is really, I think the culmination of all of that really important effort, which is building up the data infrastructure, allows us to do really great work like what Peter and his team, which he'll tell you more about, have been working really hard on for a number of years. And so I think that's what this project is, just trying to build the basis for us to be able to get to those outcomes and quality measures that we really care about, to make sure that these programs are serving learners. Just the final thing, again, just to come back to the non-credit research collaboratives I mentioned, there's a lot of great resources on our website. We have, a great team of people who've been working together on this effort, and we continue to see collaborative efforts together. And so this is, really this webinar series is a way to kind of showcase a lot of that work that we've all been collectively doing. Dee, you will be presenting at the next webinar in February, and we'll continue to showcase work that we've all been doing. So I'm going to stop because Peter has so much great content. I don't want to talk a minute more. So I'll hand things over to Peter to talk about his work.
Colleagues, thank you for having me. I am Kayla. I'm trying to share here. Do you mind taking down your share? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. There we go. Let me know if that's coming through okay. Great. Appreciate the chance to talk with everyone today. Again, my name is Peter Bahr. I'm the Vice President and Managing Research Director of the Strada Institute for the Future of Work. We are, as Steve mentioned, a think tank embedded within a foundation doing innovative, rigorous work, research, trying to answer the key policy questions that states and the federal government at large are trying to answer. This work that I'll present today was conducted with my colleague, Dr. Rooney Columbus, the principal and founder of E&E Analytics. If you want to grab this QR code here right on this first page, I'm going to hit you with a few QR codes, but this one will take you to an abbreviated version of this research manuscript that was just published, and the manuscript itself. If you want to pick that up, I'll just give you a moment. All right, great. And then we'll revisit this QR code a little bit later. As I mentioned, the Institute is focused on answering these key questions. What we're doing is developing and conducting rigorous field-leading research, providing actionable insights, informing national discourse, and speaking to a wide range of stakeholders, partnering with states as opportunity arises to help them answer these questions, and are eager for other partners going forward in the future. Here's an outline for my talk today, 7 points. First, I want to offer some thanks to the folks who made this research possible. I'm going to talk briefly about why non-credit education is important, something we're probably all familiar with, but I'll touch on a few ideas. I'm going to talk about some of the types of non-credit education in community colleges. And I think probably most folks on the call will be familiar with the different types, but it's good to sort of walk through the domain. I'm going to talk briefly about relevant findings from mine and my team's 5-state study of non-credit students in community colleges, the first study of its kind that looked at extraordinarily large student populations across 5 states. Then we'll talk about what the actual function of non-credit is, and that will lead into the findings of this research paper that we just published, answering the question of whether non-credit occupational training pays off for students. And finally, we'll turn to look at the implications for Workforce Pell and WIOA reauthorization. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I am just god awful at keeping an eye on the chat when I'm presenting. So I'm eager for Steve, if you want to pop in with questions along the way, please feel free.
No worries. That's why I'm here.
Special thanks to my colleagues at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board and the Texas Education Research Center at UT Austin, and also to Lumina Foundation for funding for this study when I was at the University of Michigan. This work could not be done without the critical work and insights and the contributions of my colleagues at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And I see a few of them are on the call today, so thank you for making time for that. Why is non-credit important? Let's think about this for a second. First of all, we know that it's massive in scale. Estimates are widely varying, but something like 4 million students per year at least. And that number is actually a rather old number. We think the number is probably much higher now. And then based on some more recent research, there's some indication that maybe as much as 40% of all community college headcount is individuals in non-credit education. So it's just this enormous space affecting many millions of students every year. But of course, there's no significant national level data collection. State level data collection, as Michelle mentioned, is highly variable, tends to be not great, actually. And then there is the lack of data has contributed to a very limited research base. So we have lots and lots of students who are involved in educational activities about which we know very, very little. Whether it's really paying off for them the way they hope. Then, of course, there's some recent policy activity in this space. There was expanded Pell eligibility for short-term occupational training, which likely will affect some segment of non-credit educational offerings. We're looking at the possible reauthorization of WIOA, which also will have an impact on non-credit occupational training. And finally, there is movements all across the country to expand credit for prior learning, which will speak to the connection or address this connection between non-credit and for-credit offerings that I'll touch on right at the end of my talk. My colleague, Mark D'Amico, has done a great job of sort of painting a picture of what's happening in non-credit that's been valuable for the research in this area. And he points to 4 main categories of non-credit education. The first 2 are occupational training in nature. One is open enrollment, something that students are paying for themselves or that's funded by, financial aid or something of that nature, but that is ultimately not structured for, or paid for by employers. That's the open enrollment occupational training, by far the largest share of non-credit in most states, we found. Employer-sponsored occupational training is occupational training that's oriented towards serving particular training needs of employers, but delivered by the colleges. There's also pre-college remediation or basic skills that happens to varying levels in non-credit in different states. Some states lean much more heavily into that space, other states much less so. And then there's the smaller set of non-credit that's the personal interest, recreation, leisure type courses. And I'll say, when I first launched into work on non-credit, I was under the impression, some years ago now, that the majority of non-credit was this personal interest, recreation, and leisure type coursework, but not true at all. Actually, the vast majority is occupational training. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that, and everyone probably but me knew that going in. So my team and I at Michigan, we published this 5-state study of non-credit students that is available. If you don't want to wade through the tome that is that report, I think it's worth the time, but it is pretty thick. We also have a highlights brief that hits really on just the most important points from that report. If you want to grab one or both of these QR codes, I'll pause just for a second. All right, so what is the actual function of non-credit? Well, in this report, we conceived it as being some combination potentially of 3 things. One, it may be non-credit may be primarily or maybe serving a function, an important function of an on-ramp to for-credit education. That is a path for students to get to for-credit who otherwise might not enroll directly in for-credit coursework. Another would be the launch pad to gainful employment, and certainly we would hope to see some of that given the heavy share of non-credit that is occupational training in nature. And finally, it is possible that non-credit, we were approaching this open-minded, it's possible that non-credit was primarily a dead end for disadvantaged students. That is, students would end up in a cul-de-sac that doesn't get them anywhere that they need to go, and wouldn't have made any progress towards a more valuable, say, credit credential. What we found in our 5-state study is there's minimal evidence that non-credit is serving as an on-ramp to credit, and I'll talk a bit about that later. We also found some evidence that there is this launchpad function, particularly in Texas, is where we were able to look closely at that question, that non-credit is serving as this launchpad. We did see, descriptively speaking, meaningful earnings gains among students. And so that's the purpose of the paper that I'm discussing today, was to interrogate that question, really dig in and try to understand and measure how much is non-credit paying off for students who are enrolling in occupational training. And finally, I think that we were left at the end of this 5-state study with some uncertainty about whether it's a dead end or not for disadvantaged students. It really could be any or all of these things. And I think there's still some open questions about whether some students are ending up in a non-credit cul-de-sac that they don't come out of. So here is this, we'll go into this paper now. This is the QR code that you saw at the beginning of this presentation. That'll take you to a landing page at the Strada website, and you can access the brief and the full manuscript. I'm not going to spend too much time on the methods here. I want to get more into the findings and talk about the implications. Suffice it to say, we go into great detail in the research manuscript about the methods. We have an extraordinarily large sample. Because of the excellent data collection that Texas does, we're able to look at a very large sample of students involved in non-credit training. We tried to focus very specifically on the non-credit component of their education. So we focused on the subset of students who did not enroll in credit for at least 5 years before they enrolled in non-credit, and at least 5 years after they enrolled in non-credits, trying to isolate that window of time and isolate that educational experience so that we could measure the labor market returns to it. We focused on individuals who are working age 23 to 60, and those who were able to monitor a fairly lengthy stretch of time in their earnings and really understand how this is impacting their opportunity. We used individual fixed effects models, yada, yada, yada. So this is broadly generalizable across working age adults in Texas who had some attachment to the labor force and who exclusively participated in non-credit education. Happy to talk about those methods more later if you like. Here's the top line findings, and I have to say it's hard for me to, I have trouble emphasizing just how important and how large the effects of non-credit occupational training are. I think I've spent so much time doing education and workforce research and so much time studying community colleges, and I was a community college student myself. I often mention that in speaking, and did occupational training, workforce training, and so on. I didn't come in very optimistic about the impact of non-credit. It tends to be pretty short. You tend to be thinking about students who are maybe would be driven in perhaps by unfavorable economic circumstances and so on. And so I did not expect to see really positive outcomes. And as a result, we interrogated these findings in every possible way. Every permutation of models that we could run, we did. And I will say the findings that I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and my colleague are really the most conservative of the results and probably underestimates of the impact. But what we found was that about within 2 years after completing non-credit occupational training, on average, workers' wages grew by about $2,000 per year, which is about a 4% increase over their pre-training wages. That's adjusting for inflation. The chances of being employed in the quarter immediately after training increased by almost 6 percentage points, 5.6 percentage points. The first top line number, the $2,000 there, that's only thinking about people who were attached to the labor force. So we're not thinking about folks who were unemployed, who gained employment. And when we include those folks in, it nearly doubles the wage gains within 2 years after training. Average growth in annual earnings is about $4,000 per year, $3,895. And even 2 years after the training, way out, 24 months later, still there is an elevated chance of being employed, 3.8 percentage points. Yet the average length of training was just 92 hours among these students. So we're thinking about something like a 3-credit course. and about 19% of the non-credit occupational training in this particular sample exceeded the 150-hour window that's described in the recent Workforce Pell enactment. So let's dig a bit deeper into some of the findings. We looked at returns or gains by field of study, and you can see there at the top, here's that average figure again, average 2 years after training, an average gain of about $2,000 per year. But gains varied quite a lot by field of study. Transportation, enormous gains, $10,000 per year. Engineering technology, and we're thinking about like petroleum technology, for example, $6,000 per year. Construction, $2,700 per year. Protective services, $2,000, and so on and so forth. Even early education and childcare, which tends to have lower, sort of classically in study of the labor market returns to community college education, tends to have low returns. Still, gains were about $1,300 per year, 2 years after training. And I'll say that one thing that you don't see here that you will see in the paper is there's a lot of variability when you look at field of study intersecting with the length of the training. For example, longer training in protective services, a training that exceeded 300 hours, longer training in nursing, training that exceeded 300 hours, returns were very, very strong, very high, much higher than what you're seeing here. So you're seeing an amalgamation, an aggregation of the returns to nursing or protective services or what have you across a range of different training types and different training lengths. One thing that surprised us, however, is that down here at the bottom, you'll see mechanics, repair and welding, information sciences, communications, design, business, and marketing, all fields where we tend to see decent returns, decent earnings gains on the credit side. We did not see them on the non-credit side. However, one of the things that we're investigating here, and I think an important caveat to the interpretation, is that wage gains can be low, and yet the non-credit training can still be aligned with employers' needs. And I'm thinking, for instance, of all the training or retraining, recertification, relicensing that's needed, and the educational requirements that go along with that. For instance, my wife recently renewed her nursing license, and in doing so, she had to complete some annual training and sort of recertify in various areas to demonstrate her competencies and readiness to work in that space. And so that's quite common. And our suspicion is that some of what we're seeing on these low return fields is actually recertification, where you wouldn't expect to see strong earnings gains. What you're seeing is education that's helping people keep their jobs, not get a new job. We looked at earnings gains by the duration of the training I mentioned earlier, and what we see here is much stronger gains once we get over about 90 hours. So this graph can be a little bit challenging to interpret. If you look here, you're seeing on the left-hand side is the average increase in annual earnings by 2 years after training. What you're seeing on the bottom is the number of years since the training was completed. And you can see that the lower duration training, 31 to 90 hours or 30 or fewer hours, relatively short, under 3 credits, or in some cases under 1 credit, whatever wage gains you're going to see in that training, they're going to emerge quite quickly after the training is completed. However, longer training, the wage gains take longer to show up, right? So by 2 years after training, you're starting to get a sense for the actual payoff on average of the longer duration training programs. And that's important, and we'll come back to that. But it says that if you're looking just 2 quarters or 3 quarters, even a whole year after training is completed, if that training is of a longer duration in nature, you're unlikely to be seeing the full effects of that training on wages. I also note, and I'll mention this again later, that you see the lower wages among individuals who have 300 hours of training or more. I would interpret that cautiously. That's just 6% of our sample. It's a very small segment of the sample, and I wouldn't put too much weight on that. We also looked at whether or not you changed industries affected your earnings gains. And what you see here is that individuals who changed industries had much, much stronger earnings gains. So when non-credit is serving a purpose in helping people get a job in a new industry or keep a job in a new industry, wage gains are much higher. When non-credit training is not associated with some kind of change in earnings, wage gains are much lower. And that's pretty consistent with the assertion that I made earlier that training that's designed to help you keep your job, keep your certification, keep your license, wouldn't be expected to yield strong wage gains. Whereas it's the ability to get certified in a new field or to change into a new industry where you'd expect to see the stronger wage gains. We also compared, I mentioned the different types of training earlier. We also compared open enrollment training and contract training. And we found that wage gains in contract training are stronger and almost immediate. Now, that's consistent with the idea that non-credit occupational training, when conducted for an employer, contracted with an employer, is often going to be delivered after individuals have secured a new job. So not only are the wage gains stronger, but they're also immediate. We don't expect to see there'll be this transition into the labor force afterwards or into a new job where wage gains may grow over time. So the contract training is paying off more quickly and to a greater extent than is the open enrollment training. Nevertheless, we do see strong wage gains for open enrollment training emerging, some number of quarters, 6, 7, 8 quarters after the training is completed. All right, what are the implications for Workforce Pell and WIOA? First, earnings gains and employment outcomes really have to be central to how we think about implementing Workforce Pell and WIOA funding. But as we lean into that, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to understand this? How are we going to connect this to where Workforce Pell and WIOA, Workforce Pell and WIOA funding are directed? We need to be cognizant that the earnings gains unfold over time. That first year after the education or the training oftentimes is not reflective of the total gains and shouldn't necessarily be a reason to consider a program to be not returning strongly or not in demand. So metrics need to take account of the time it takes for the gains to unfold. We also need to be aware that earnings gains are not the whole story. Even as we're directing our attention to implementing Workforce Pell and the rulemaking that's about to happen next week or begin next week around Workforce Pell, as we're thinking about how to implement earnings gains, employment outcomes as metrics, we have to be aware that training that helps people keep their jobs, helps them stay safe and be skilled in the work that they do and deliver their contributions in a safe way for the public, that that periodic training or retraining that's required to keep certifications or licenses is also important and is also part of the story of non-credit occupational training. As we expected, longer training tends to pay off better than shorter training. That's not really a surprise. That's consistent with the human capital understanding of the way that education works. But there clearly are other factors at work as well. Non-credit training that leads to changes of industries is yielding much stronger gains. And there's a lot more to unpack on that. My colleague, Dr. Rooney Columbus, and I are working on this question now, trying to understand exactly how the timing of the training and the trajectory of one's employment and the industry in which one is engaged all work together to affect how earnings gains unfold. And I think we're going to need to get to the heart of that, not just to understand students' experiences, but also to be able to accurately measure when fields of study are really paying off for students. We also see, and I didn't show this earlier in the slides, but women's gains tend to be substantially less than men's. And that's even after we account for field of study, for the duration of the training, for whether the training is open enrollment or contract training, and so on and so forth. So there are marked differences that at present we don't understand and are not able to fully explain, but need to be investigated more closely. The other thing that the last point here is that stackability and portability requirements of Workforce Pell really demand that we figure out how to bridge the divide between non-credit training and credit coursework. And here's another QR code. I think it's my fifth so far. And this will take you to a brief that my colleagues and I at the University of Michigan wrote when I was there that focused specifically on non-credit in Texas and examined descriptively some of the kind of like dynamics there. And you see that Texas, like many states that we looked at, most of the states we looked at, very few students make it across the divide. About 7% of the students in some kind of workforce training, non-credit workforce training in Texas, make it over to the credit side of the house within 2 years. So the transition rate is extremely low, and that's common. That was true in almost every state we looked at except California. And California has a very different model of non-credit, so it's not really a good parallel. And so we got to figure out how to fix that. It's a missed opportunity, right? We have individuals coming in for workforce training and succeeding, and it's paying off in many cases. How can we help them make the shift from the non-credit side over to longer, more economically fruitful training programs or educational programs on the for-credit side, and do it in a way that doesn't require them to navigate complexity that even all of us would probably have trouble navigating at this very moment, making sense of how to get from one side to the other and get credit for the training we've already done. So I'm going to stop there so I have a chance to field any questions. This is, again, the link to the Strada webpage where we've got the brief that we released today, as well as a link to the published manuscript, and I am eager for your questions.
Thanks, Peter. That was some really powerful information, and I don't think I shared this, but prior to ACCT, I was at a community college in Maryland and I was assistant dean in the workforce development area. And so anecdotally, I saw this all the time around, students improving their economic situation, but it's really nice to kind of see this data start to really anchor what we've seen, just anecdotally. So just for our audience, feel free to put questions in the chat. I am going to start with a couple of questions that I had for Peter. And I think the first one is pretty simple, is, how did you land on Texas and what were they doing that made them a good fit for your research?
Texas that's a great question. Texas is a great state. I love my Texas colleagues. It's a great state to work in. It's a great state to work with. It's a state that's moving and shaking in terms of innovating and developing stronger opportunities for students, or strengthening what they have and developing even stronger opportunities. But part of it is because Texas has a great data system. And so it's possible to answer these questions in Texas that in some states it's not possible to answer the question. The data don't exist. But I'll say that in the Institute for the Future of Work, the work that we've done in Texas and similar work in other states, in Ohio and elsewhere in California and so on, we can replicate or extend or expand that work in any state that is collecting data on education, that has educational records and earnings records. We can come in and help answer these questions in each state, tailored to each state. And in fact, we are eager to partner with states. So there are states here that are interested in similar questions, whether it's non-credit or for credit, and trying to understand where the credentials of value are, what makes a credential valuable, what are the emerging places where in the educational system that could meet emerging demand in the workforce, what programs are likely to qualify for Workforce Pell, and so on. These are all questions that the Institute is well equipped to answer, and we're self-funded, so we don't need to secure funding from our state partners to do that work.
Well, there's the magic phrase right there. You don't need any funding to do this work. But
Free.
I think
free is my favorite word. Yeah.
I think, the other thing about Texas is just the size, right? There's 50 community colleges. There's just a large database right here, at your fingertips. And so I'm sure that made for even better, analysis.
Mm.
So one thing, you did allude to this in your presentation, and, when you talk about the idea is that the more education someone gets, the more productive and skilled they are, theoretically, the employer should reward them with higher compensation, right? So one of the things you mentioned was that the gains for students taking a 150 to 300 hour program were higher. So they were $4,800 per year versus those taking over 300 hours which only increased by $3,600. And I think you mentioned something that there was a very small sample size, but I didn't know if was there anything else that attributed to that? Was it their field, or was there something else going on?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, this is there's only so much you can put into a presentation. And so in the paper, and in fact the paper grew in the published manuscript that you can access through the Strada link I provided earlier. I'll drop it in the chat as well. The we disaggregate the duration of the effects of duration of training by field of study, and that affects things as well. There are some that 300 hours, as I mentioned here, this 300 hours of training. While there was relatively few training programs of that length, some of them paid off really strongly, many of them did not. So there's a high level of variability by field of study. Some of the main drivers here, I alluded to this earlier, are nursing and protective services. Long duration programs, 300 hours plus in those fields, have very, very strong gains. But some of the other training programs that are long just simply did not have those level of gains. So you're seeing this level of aggregation in this slide that I think can be a bit deceptive. And then you add to that the fact that this is such a small percentage of the sample.
Right.
I personally have somewhat less confidence in any number that has, less than 10% of the sample involved.
Right. No, that's a great point, and thanks for clarifying that. So along those same lines, in the paper, I don't know that you touched on this in the presentation. Like you said, there's just so much to cover. You found that the gains were larger for that first spell of training, and that so if a student came and they got a 150-hour training, the next time they came back, the gains were less, and then by the third time they come back, it was almost zero.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about those gains, is it different? I think you did touch on this a little bit. Are the gains smaller? Would this be different if they were moving into a different occupation versus just more advanced training in their current occupation, like going, if they're a medical assistant, they go from nursing assistant to medical assistant, that's that big jump. And then
Yeah.
they're getting upskilled like phlebotomist, EKG technician, but they're still an MA versus
Yeah.
going from MA to LPN to RN, where you're still in the same sector, but you're changing occupations.
That's a great question. Yeah, that is one of those points that I think it begins to you intersect a lot of ideas when we're not you, but when we're measuring the returns to different numbers of spells of training, as we were calling them. And as you said, I don't show a slide on this, probably should have, but the first spell is the real payoff spell, and every spell after that tends to have lower average gains. As you said, by the third, you're typically getting very little gains, almost zero additional return. But there's a couple of complexities there. One is that you've got a self-selection piece of the story. That is, individuals who completed their first training and got a big payoff would be on average less likely to come back, right? And so that you wouldn't necessarily, you've got sort of the selecting in, like what industry are you in, or to what extent are you in an occupational line where you're able to leverage training for a payoff. If the payoff of the first training is low, you may be more incentivized to come back for a second layer of training, and so on. So I think there's some self-selection piece there that makes that difficult to disentangle. The other part of the story is I think what we're seeing is the recertification piece, where individuals who are coming back for a second or third training spell are more likely to be in fields where what they're coming back for is not an industry change, but the retention of their cert or their license. And folks who know me on this call know I've mentioned this almost every chance I get. I was a community college student. I worked at a sewage treatment plant as an operator at night while I went to school during the day. And I still have my wastewater license. Anyone who knows me on this call has heard this story too many times, but I still have my wastewater license to this day as my backup option for a career. You always need a backup. And I keep my commercial driver's license. But along the way, I also had a clean water license in California to practice as a clean water operator. But they implemented continuing education requirements that just, given that I was no longer working in the water quality field, proved to be too burdensome for me to continue. But had I been in that field and been recertifying, I would have been taking non-credit occupational training that had zero effect on my earnings, because it was just helping me keep my license, right? Just helping me keep my clean water license. And wastewater could do the same thing. And they would say, you got to keep your license, you got to keep recertifying. And I would do it because I don't know, I just would. So I think that's what we're seeing there. That continual training is probably primarily for folks who need that to keep their jobs, which of course is critical, right? I don't want to discount I in
Right.
no way want to discount how important recertification is. Because indeed, if you are a clean water operator, clean water treatment plant operator, and you are responsible to make sure that the water that goes into folks' sinks and their cups that they're drinking and the showers and so on is clean and safe and fully disinfected and so on, we want everybody in that field to be top notch. And part of that is the recertification. So it may not show up in their wages, but I definitely want to see that training continue. I definitely want that training to be available. And I wouldn't want colleges to not offer those recertification opportunities, the training needed for that recertification, simply because we don't see wage gains, right? So this is why I think we need to take this holistic picture of the role that non-credit occupational training is playing in individuals' lives.
Exactly. And what's motivating to go take those courses? Like you said, is it recertification versus, sort of career advancement or upskilling or things like that? So,
Yes.
we had a question in the chat. We shift gears a little bit, talking more about this non-credit to credit. So the question in the chat is, what about creating an incentivized statewide articulation of non-credit to credit? So this individual's in Ohio, and they subsidize non-credit incumbent worker training through tech cred. So what about giving funding priority for like tech cred to non-credit training that articulates to credit through the ITAG list? So I don't
Yeah.
know if
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
no, I was going to say, I think everyone, particularly that's a component of Workforce Pell is this articulation. And I think there's going to be more and more discussion around this. We had a project early on around non-credit to credit alignment and,
Mhm.
um, you know, it goes deeper than articulation, although I think that's a huge component of it. But there's like systemic and operational challenges at the institutions that have to be overcome. So this might be a nice sort of segue into those deeper conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, hi, Tom. I know Tom, and I have worked with my colleagues doing research in Ohio for over a decade now. It's one of my favorite group of folks to work with, in part, well, because they're just great people, but in part because the state is innovating in such incredible ways around bridging, creating opportunity and bridging between opportunities in workforce, career and tech, and so on. And for instance, on that is the undersung Ohio Technical Centers, which is a comparatively small segment of all the students served in the state, but doing really, really important work in what is effectively a non-credit format. Like it's a contact hour based format where they're helping folks, get into the labor force. They're working very closely with employers to make sure those opportunities exist. And it's just fundamentally important work. They're also part of the prison post-secondary system through the Ohio Community School System. So it's so important what's happening there. And the work around C tags and I tags has been fundamental to that. It really should be the case, and I agree wholeheartedly, that if you can get for instance, a wastewater license or a clean water license or something like that, if you can get your license and pass the tests and so on that are required, that should count as demonstrated progress towards a credential in that field. And I think this is what Ohio has recognized as well. Many states are getting on board with this. Just Ohio is way out in front in terms of the work. And so I think making that whole thing, that whole path smoother so that it doesn't require an insider's knowledge of credit for prior learning, as it often does, creating a portfolio and knowing who to talk to and what path to go down with a college, making that process automated effectively so that individuals can get the credit without being aware, this deep insider knowledge of how to navigate the system, I think will incentivize more people to continue on that credit path. This is one of the things we argue in the brief and in the manuscript that if we can let people know about these opportunities in advance, don't expect them to find them on their own, and automate them in ways like we do so many other things so that they're automatically getting that credit and able to make progress and understand what opportunities are in front of them. I think we'll see more people moving over to the for credit side.
Absolutely. That was one of the challenges we found in this project was that the students were not aware. So they
Yeah.
have to be aware in order to take advantage of it. And while we're waiting for some additional questions to come into the chat, so audience, feel free to ask away. Um, we've been talking about Workforce Pell passing. So how do you think that passage of Workforce Pell will impact research like you're doing? And then how do you see your current research helping Workforce Pell be successful? Because I think that is a question that's on a lot of people's minds right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really eager to partner with states to help them answer these questions because I think virtually every state in the union right now is looking across their program offerings, trying to figure out which ones qualify for, will, or probably will, or could qualify for Workforce Pell, and among those that don't, what are the opportunities to create programs? And so I don't know for anyone who's familiar with the multi-state data collaborative. My team and I at Strada are putting forward proposals to the multi-state data collaborative later this week, offering collaboration with states who are able to share their administrative data that we can help you figure out where are the credentials of value and what is it that's making credentials of value valuable in your workforce so that you can create more of them. And it seems like simple questions. Of course, when we get into the meat of it, it ends up being complicated. But we're really eager to help states do that and well positioned to provide that kind of research support. So, for any states, any state partners here who are interested in working on these questions, we're interested in working with you on those questions.
Well, thank you for that information. I think we haven't had any additional questions come in, so and I don't have any lined up. So
Can I
I'll
throw
take
out one? I want to throw out one other, if I can, Steve, do you mind?
yes, no, and then one came in, so go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to call out another props, as they say, or they used to say. I don't think my kids say that anymore. To Ohio for their 1 year option, which is another like innovative approach to bridging from the technical centers, essentially a non-credit kind of system or structure, over to the community colleges on the for-credit side to help students transition and make credit. It's got a catchy name, and it makes it possible for like a smooth transition from the technical centers to the community colleges. So really, again, a very innovative state, really interesting things happening there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think we did have a couple of questions come in. So, what other narratives slash data will help non-credit when California starts discussions on how to include non-credit programs in workforce Pell?
Mm-hmm.
Just a simple one there for you.
Yeah, wait, I'm looking for that in the chat here. Where, let's see, what narratives will help
It's
non-credit?
right under the Ohio
That one starts
question.
with how to include non-credit programs in Workforce Pell. Okay, so this is something that we have been poking around in ourselves empirically, and I think part of the what we need to look at is the extent of alignment between the non-credit and by the way, Madeline, hi, I know Madeline as well. I probably know half the people on this call. It's lovely. It's like old friends. The the extent of alignment between the non-credit offerings and the for-credit offerings. So some of the things that we looked at, and we've looked at this in California and Iowa, and I have a series of briefs that I can share and put up that make available to folks. But where we've looked at that the extent of alignment and where the transitions actually occur between non-credit and for-credit. So you think about fields of study. Are individuals on the non-credit side in a particular occupational field leaping over into the same field on the for-credit side? And if they're not, what opportunities are there to create those bridges? And so I think that drill down into the nature, and I don't think anyone would be better positioned than Madeline to do this at Mount SAC, would be to look and see where those alignments occur between the non-credit and the for-credit side. The work that we've done, I think, is all it's all still awfully aggregated. I think we've got to get past the broad SIP, two fields of study, and really get down into the nitty gritty of the nature of the programs that are being offered and the education that's being offered. And that's part of what I'm proposing in this multi-state data collaborative work is to get past the broad fields of study and look at the content of the programs more specifically.
Well, that's good. We did so another question. I think you may have mentioned this, but if you could touch on it again. So the 7% of students or the 7% who end up taking credit courses, is that because the students are not aware or they're not interested?
It's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. I suspect my colleague Michelle may have some ideas, though, because I know she's done some student interviews and a much closer look at what the individuals are actually reporting, but we don't know yet. And I think it's a very important question. Like, why don't they make it? Is it just lack of knowledge, lack of interest, lack of alignment? Are we talking about things that are happening in different parts of the state, different colleges that are not near one another? I don't think, unless Michelle knows, I don't think anyone knows.
I mean, I think we are doing interviews with students, and later in the year we'll be sharing out more of those findings. I think there's a lot of things that are at play. I mean, I think that one of the findings that comes through with the interviews with non-credit students we've done that's kind of pretty clear is that the students are really looking to get into jobs, and their lives are very, very busy. They've got a lot of things going on, and many of them aren't really getting a lot of support services from their colleges. So I think a lot of these things all add up together, I think, to make those transitions more rare. And that is a question that we're continuing to look into. So early snapshot, but we'll have more to share, I think, in the new year. But it's an important question, and one that we need to know more about, I think.
There was a
Thanks,
question about
Michelle.
whether or not personal and leisure courses were included in this study that I was talking about today. No, they weren't. This was strictly occupational, the occupational side, data, the compulsory data collection in Texas, where data would be coming up from the colleges to the ERC, to the education research centers. The data system is focused on the workforce side.
So there was actually a question from a trustee, Peter, if you could chime in on this, and then I have some resources too. So do you have any recommendations for trustees, where to review what material to review, or the best place to go to learn about Workforce Pell? And then also, are there community colleges that they could learn from in terms of how to best build the bridge between non-credit and credit?
That's a great question. I mentioned Ohio. That's I would say, is a first stop to look at the ways that a state can innovate around, like, be really creative about how to build bridges between non-credit and for credit through credit for prior learning that has been institutionalized or yeah, I mean, effectively, like, not quite automated, but closer to it, right? Making a much simpler path. So I would start there in Ohio, and I'm happy to put you in touch with colleagues there. The As far as where to learn about Workforce Pell, I think we're trying to get our handle on that right now as well. I think everyone here knows, the rulemaking sessions start on Monday, and there'll be 2 weeks or two periods of rulemaking. And I think we're all eager to see what comes from that. I'm hoping that the research that we're injecting out there right now into the discourse will help the rulemaking session and the policymakers in the space to be thinking about the nuances of non-credit training, occupational training, and how to make sure that we don't isolate non-credit away from Workforce Pell funding opportunities. But if your state is Christine, if your state's interested in working with us, we can probably help with the data analytics on this.
No, I think that's great, and I would agree with you. I think, before rulemaking happens, it's hard to you don't want to speculate and produce misinformation. I think in addition to that, we actually we're doing a series on Workforce Pell and how community colleges can prepare with what they know now. We did actually, Michelle and Mark were on our first one around data collection. We did one a few before Thanksgiving on the state's role and like what their perspective is. And we're doing one December 18th around the workforce alignment piece. And so those are on our website. And if Christine, if you want to reach out, I can connect you with those resources. And also I'm putting in the chat that project I mentioned around non-credit alignment. It doesn't necessarily provide too many solutions. It was more of try to figure out what the barriers are and some good examples. But there are some case studies and some contacts at those institutions, and I'm sure they'd be willing to have a conversation. All right. Well, let's see.
I know we're getting
Again,
close to time,
yeah.
Steve. I just wanted to say to all my colleagues out there, to all the trustees and everyone on the call, thanks for the work that you do. I don't know that you get thanked nearly enough for what you're doing. community colleges are providing opportunity like no other set of institutions in the country. So I'm very grateful for the work that you do. I am a beneficiary of it and a product of the California community college system, and a true believer in the work that community colleges are doing. So if I can be of any service to you, please note my email address and please reach out to me.
Yes, well, I just want to say I want to thank you both, Peter and Michelle, for being on this call. This was some great information. I think there's a lot more to come around this. I'm excited that individuals like you are leading the charge with this because this is not my field, so, or not my forte. So I'm glad there's people out there that are much better at it than I am. So with that, I just want to remind everyone we will be sending out the recording and the slides from today's presentation once everything is compiled. You'll get an email if you registered for this. Feel free to share it, and it will be up on our website. But again, thanks to my guests, and hope you enjoy the information. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.